On the morning of November 1st, 1755, Lisbon was not just a city, it was the glittering jewel of an empire that stretched across 4 continents, a metropolis that rivaled London and Paris in splendor, wealth, and above all, devotion. It was the Halloween St. John's Day, one of the most sacred dates on the Catholic calendar. The population of nearly 200,000 souls awoke with a single purpose: to celebrate divine glory. Imagine the scene. The autumn sun shone over the Tagus River. The scent of incense hung heavily in the narrow streets, and the sound of hundreds of bronze bells echoed across all 7 hills. The grand cathedrals, such as the Carmo Convent and Lisbon Cathedral, were so crowded that the human warmth competed with that of the tens of thousands of candles lit on each altar, in each niche, in each prayer for the dead. At 9:30 in the morning, Lisbon was the pinnacle of faith and Baroque opulence. Gold from Brazil adorned the walls, diamonds decorated the jewel, robes of the nobles and sacred music filled the air. What no one realized was that, beneath their feet, the earth itself was about to tear the veil of reality. What followed was not just a disaster, it was the moment when history changed direction. An apocalypse that lasted only a few hours, but whose ashes would reshape philosophy, science, and the very essence of Western civilization. This was the destruction of Lisbon, and once the ground began to roar, the sky fell upon the faithful. To understand the fall, we first need to understand the height from which Portugal plummeted. In the 18th century, the kingdom was bathed in the unimaginable wealth of its colonial mines. Lisbon was a vibrant labyrinth of marble, libraries that held the secrets of navigators, and rituals of inquisition who maintained absolute control over the human spirit. The city felt protected, almost untouchable under God's gaze. But its own infrastructure was a perfect trap. The multi-story houses, built of heavy stones on unstable sandy soil, squeezed into alleyways where the sun rarely touched the ground. The city was a house of cards waiting for a breath, but what came was not a breath. It was a roar from the depths of the Atlantic. At 9:40, the first sound emerged. It was not an ordinary tremor, but a deep, cavernous noise that many mistook for the thunder of distant cannons or the end of the world. In the churches, the faithful looked up. The crystal chandeliers began to sway in violent arcs, casting frantic shadows on the gilded walls, and then the world began to sway. The first tremor lasted 2 minutes, but in the minds of the survivors, it felt like an eternity. The gigantic naves of the cathedrals, built to last millennia, began to shatter like glass. Carmo Convent. The roof collapsed at the exact moment of the Mass, crushing hundreds of people who, seconds before, had been begging for mercy. The lime dust rose in clouds so thick that the bright morning turned into a white, suffocating night. People blinded by dust and covered in blood groped among the rubble, hearing only the sound of falling stones and the cries of those trapped under tons of masonry. But the earthquake wasn't over yet. A second tremor, even more violent, lasted an incredible 5 minutes. That was enough time for almost all the large buildings to be reduced to mountains of rubble. The hills of Lisbon looked like waves in the sea, and the city that had been a symbol of stability became a meat and stone grinder. However, the earthquake was only the prologue to a hellish triad. While the survivors tried to understand what remained, the second horror manifested itself. The fire. Remember the tens of thousands of candles lit for the sacred holiday. When the buildings collapsed, those flames encountered silk curtains, Persian carpets, dry wood, and oil stocks. In less than 30 minutes, hundreds of fires merged into a single colossal firestorm. The phenomenon was physical and cruel. The fire was so intense that it sucked the oxygen from the surrounding streets, creating hurricane-force winds that dragged debris and people into the flames. Entire libraries, containing the original accounts of Vasco da Gama's voyages and secret maps of the New World, evaporated in seconds. The royal palace, with its 70,000 works of art and Flemish tapestries, burned for days. The smell of incense was replaced by the unbearable odor of burning flesh, a perfume of death that would linger over the city for weeks. Those trapped in the rubble, but still alive, watched in horror as the wall of flame slowly advanced toward them, with no hands to help them. Desperate to escape the heat and collapses, thousands of people ran to the only area that seemed to offer salvation, the port area on the banks of the Tietê River. There, in Cais do Sodré, the crowd knelt in the mud, facing the sea, begging for a miracle. But the ocean, which had once brought the riches of India, now came to reclaim souls. The survivors noticed something bizarre and terrifying. The water was receding. The Tagus River lowered violently, revealing the muddy bottom, centuries-old shipwrecks, lost anchors, and dying fish. There was a moment of absolute silence, a vacuum in nature. Then, on the horizon, a wall of grey water almost 15 meters high appeared, advancing with relentless speed. Tsunami had struck the heart of Lisbon with a hydrostatic force that pulverized what remained of the walls and dragged thousands of people into the abyss in seconds. The sea swallowed the dead and the living, extinguishing fires in some areas, only to drown the survivors in others. In less than 2 hours, Lisbon had suffered the full fury of the three elements: earth, fire, and water. The scale of the mortality was paralyzing. It is estimated that in a single morning, between 30 and 60,000 people perished. But the physical devastation was only the beginning. The true collapse occurred in the soul of Europe. Lisbon was the most Catholic city in the world, destroyed precisely on the holiest day, while its faithful were inside the house of God. Why would the Creator spare the Bairro Alto, the area of brothels and taverns that suffered little damage, while the great cathedrals were the first to fall? This question shook the foundations of European thought. The Inquisition, in an act of desperation, tried to blame the sins of the population, forbidding the burial of the dead without rites, while the plague threatened to emerge among the exposed corpses. But the world no longer accepted this explanation. Great thinkers such as Voltaire, they used the tragedy to attack religious optimism, arguing that nature was indifferent to human suffering. The Lisbon earthquake was the catalyst for the Enlightenment, breaking the Church's monopoly on explaining reality. From the ashes and mud, however, emerged a shadowy, efficient and pragmatic figure, the Marquis of Pombal. While the king fled to live in luxurious tents, terrified by new tremors, Pombal assumed absolute control with a phrase that has become legendary: bury the dead and care for the living. He not only rebuilt Lisbon, he reinvented it. Pombal ordered the first scientific investigation into a natural disaster, sending questionnaires to all parishes to understand the direction of the tremors and the behavior of animals. Unknowingly, he was founding the Modern Seismology. He demanded that the new city be built with wide, straight streets, and that each building be equipped with Pombaline cage, an internal wooden structure designed to flex during an earthquake, but not break. Lisbon became the first modern city in Europe, born not from aesthetic desire, but from the brutal need for survival and the application of reason to chaos. The great earthquake of 1755 remains a grim reminder of our fragility. It proved that the most solid structures, whether made of stone, gold, or dogma, can be reduced to dust in a matter of minutes when nature decides to move. It taught us that civilization is a temporary state, maintained only by our ability to learn from the rubble and to rebuild with science what superstition could not protect. Today, as we walk through the perfectly aligned streets of Lisbon's Baixa district, we are walking on the ashes of an empire that believed itself to be eternal, and on the tomb of an era that was buried by the earth and washed away by the sea. Lisbon's lesson is that the end of the world may be just the beginning of a new one, if we have the courage to look at the past without the blinders of fear.